Today's session is going to be focusing on COVID-19 vaccine and considerations for children with medical complexity. Our guest faculty is Dr. Elizabeth Lucas. She works in the Division of Complex Healthcare at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. She is a board certified in internal medicine, pediatrics, and pediatric infectious disease. Her research interests include optimizing treatment for common infections in complex patients. Dr. Lucas, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. We'll get started. I do not have any financial disclosures, and the information that I will be presenting today may not represent the opinions of the AAP. Next slide, please. More important disclosure actually is that there is new information about COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 becoming available almost every single day. So while this presentation is up to date as of the date that I'm presenting it to the best of my abilities, new information is coming in all the time. And really the best places to stay up to date with things are the following websites: the one with AAP, one with the CDC, and one for the World Health Organization. Next slide. So today our objectives will be to assess vaccine options for COVID-19 pandemic management and discuss our current recommendations for vaccine administration and considerations for children with medical complexity. Next slide. So as of today, the US has 2 messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccines with good safety and efficacy profiles approved under the emergency authorization use or the EUA from the FDA. On December 12th, Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine was approved for persons aged 16 and older. And then the following week, on December 19th, Moderna's mRNA vaccine was approved for persons aged 18 and older. So both vaccines can be used in conjunction with the Advisory Committee on Immunizations Practice, or the ACIP interim recommendations. And the AAP, it's important to note, does not endorse one of these products over the other, so either of the vaccines can be used. So currently, the CDC has recommended that initial vaccine allotment be distributed to the following groups based on a risk assessment meant to target those individuals at highest risk for first contracting the infection, and then those who are at highest risk for serious manifestations of the infection. So initial vaccine allotment should be distributed to the following groups: healthcare personnel and residents of long-term care facilities, and then starting in individuals aged 75 years and older, and some other frontline essential workers. Next slide, please. When thinking about getting the COVID vaccine for children and adolescents, so obviously many of our patients are going to be under the ages of approval, the AAP has been working to advocate for including children in the trials. To date, Pfizer has enrolled children down to the age of 12 years, and they are the vaccine that actually has the lower group age indication down to 16. Moderna is also about to start a similar study, as well as another company called Janssen. And we anticipate hearing about these results from these trials in the coming months. Lastly, AstraZeneca has received approval for enrolling patients aged 5 years to 12 years, but that enrollment is actually occurring in the UK and not here in the United States at this time. So next slide, please. So I expect that many of the providers on the call today have heard questions and concerns about the safety of this new vaccine, especially since it's based on a new technology. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So at this time, there are no known additional risks of a mRNA vaccine or the lipid nanoparticles that are used to deliver the vaccine. So we are used to vaccines like live attenuated viral vaccines like the measles vaccine, which induce an immune response that is similar to the natural infection. Our mRNA vaccines are new technology, and what they actually do in contrast is they give the body instructions to produce a very specific part of the virus. In the case of COVID-19, that's the spike protein that will then induce an immune response. mRNA is actually broken down very quickly once it's in our body. So to deliver it to the areas where it will begin its work, it needs to be wrapped in a lipid nanoparticle. And once there, it can deliver its message, and it actually degrades very quickly. Some of the concerns that I've heard have been raised are that it can integrate into our DNA and genes, but actually the mRNA never makes it into the nucleus of the cell, so it cannot do either of those things. Next slide, please. And certainly, I'm sure you guys have also been fielding a lot of questions and concerns about how quickly this vaccine was developed. So I just wanted to walk through quickly and show how it was able to be sped up so quickly. And the main reason is because multiple barriers were removed. The first of which was the rapid release of a tremendous amount of funding. If anybody has experienced requesting funding for any reason, you know what a difficult and prolonged process that can be. So for something of this scale, billions of dollars were released upfront in what would normally be a multi-stepped process occurring over multiple years. By releasing that money up front, they were allowing companies to move seamlessly through the different phases that are necessary as part of vaccine development without those additional steps. Next, these vaccines were actually built on some existing technology. So just as an example, we'll talk about the group from Moderna. They had a vaccine in development for years against MERS, which stands for Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, another virus in the coronavirus family that can also cause a lot of respiratory issues. There's some very important differences between MERS and COVID-19. So the MERS vaccine ended up not being as successful as they had hoped that it would be, but it was a fully developed platform. So when the sequence for COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 was released digitally to the world last January, the researchers were able to adapt their existing platform from MERS specific to COVID-19 specific. And they were able to do that digitally and begin some preclinical trials in animals within about 24 hours. So very, very rapidly. And then the next very important step was that when the call was made to the public for volunteers to participate in vaccine trials when they were ready to start giving it to humans, people across the world and here in the United States actually answered the call very well. Certainly there's been no time in human history that a trial of this magnitude was enrolled so quickly. And then lastly, the governmental agencies that grant approval for these vaccines prioritized this data review over all of their data duties. So many of the delays that we would experience were removed in that state as well. So it was a series of events that came together to get the vaccine to consumers in just under a year. Next slide. And just to highlight that a little bit further, we'll use Moderna again as only an example because really their dates were just the easiest to find for me. So when they began their phase 3 trial, they began that on July 26th of last year. And that is the phase of trials in which we have randomization and placebo control. They were able to enroll 30,000 volunteers by October 22nd, which is less than 4 months after their start date. And actually on that final date, their October 22nd, about 25,000 of the participants had already gotten their second vaccine. So after that, they took just a little over a month to finish out the trial and gather up their final data points before they submitted their data to the FDA, which they did on November 30th. And then the data scientists at the FDA worked, I think, pretty close to around the clock, reviewing all the raw data and preparing it for the discussion with the ACIP, such that only in a few short weeks later, on December 18th, the FDA was able to grant that emergency use authorization for the vaccine. So I just wanted to show a little bit more detail to really drive home the fact that while this was historically fast, there were a lot of reasons that supported that all these important milestones could be met before approval was granted. Next slide, please. And obviously from those trials, we learned a lot about the potential side effects that we will experience with these vaccines. So generally, they're very similar to other routine vaccines, and overall, they were pretty well tolerated. So the most common reports were a sore arm or redness at the site, fatigue, fevers, chills, headaches, myalgias, and arthralgias. But like I said, most of these side effects are temporary and qualified as only mild or moderate. It is important to note that the side effects were reported to be more prominent following the second dose of vaccine. And then all complaints and side effects that have been reported are now compiled in a full list available on the FDA website, and they will be on fact sheet that is provided to everyone who receives the vaccine. For healthcare workers especially, it's just really important to consider these potential side effects when you're planning the timing of your own vaccine. You may want to choose a time, especially that second dose, when your clinical duties are light, or the day before you have some time off in the event they experience some side effects that you'll have time to recover with. That's it. Next slide, please. The only true contraindication at this time to receiving a COVID-19 vaccine is history of severe allergic reaction to any component of the COVID-19 vaccine. So to clarify, the CDC considers a history of severe allergic reaction like anaphylaxis to any other vaccine or injectable therapy, whether that be intramuscular, intravenous, or subcutaneous, as only a precaution, but not a contraindication to vaccination. So what that means is that a risk assessment needs to occur in persons who report a history of anaphylaxis to another vaccine or injectable therapy. So a small number of patients have received anaphylaxis following the receipt of the vaccine. So all patients who receive the vaccine should be monitored for at least 15 minutes following their receipt. And then those patients who have a history of severe allergic reaction due to any cause should be monitored for at least 30 minutes following administration. Then, of course, patients who do go on to have a history of severe allergic reaction or anaphylaxis to a COVID-19 vaccine should be counseled to not receive the second dose, and should also be referred to an allergist, immunologist for appropriate follow-up. Next slide, please. Okay, so as far as vaccine distribution in prioritized populations, as we've already touched on, healthcare personnel, including pediatrician, pediatric medical subspecialists, and pediatric surgeons, were all included in that phase 1A of the COVID-19 vaccine distribution. Each state, of course, is doing things a little bit differently, so your experience may vary depending on where you live. But the best way to find out what to do in your local area is to connect with your state or county health department to learn how physicians and other healthcare workers will be vaccinated in your area. For the next steps, the ACIP updated their interim vaccine allocation recommendations in late December. And as previously mentioned in phase 1B, the vaccine was offered first to those persons aged 75 and older and non-healthcare frontline essential workers, moving to phase 1C, in which the age group is lowered to include individuals who are 65 and older. And then for our discussion here today, it includes persons who are aged 16 to 64 years of age with those high-risk medical conditions, as well as some essential workers who are not included in the phase 1B. Next slide, please. So for now, states have identified initial vaccine administration sites for COVID-19 vaccine. I can tell you here in the state of Ohio, we are actually using our county boards to identify which patients qualify for that phase 1C. And then they are being shunted to areas where the vaccine is available. So of course that may be different depending on where you are living and what's available for you. And it does seem to be working so far, because I've definitely been hearing about my patients getting access to the vaccine, and they're all calling me and wanting to know my opinion and whether or not they should go forward with it. So I'm hearing about it from in our state. In the meantime, for those patients whose age does not yet qualify them for the vaccine, it's still important for us to focus on getting children caught up and keeping up to date with our routinely recommended vaccines. Unfortunately, during this pandemic, we've seen that many of the well child visits and immunization rates have dropped and have not yet rebounded to our pre-pandemic levels. Additionally, so far, the administration of the COVID-19 vaccine with other childhood and adolescent vaccines has not yet been tested. So because of this lack of data, the CDC is currently just recommending that the COVID-19 vaccine be administered alone with a minimum interval of 14 days before or after administration of any other vaccines. So traditionally, there are very few vaccines in which co-administration is problematic, but this topic does need to be studied some more, especially in our youngest children who receive a lot of vaccines at many of their visits. So next slide, please. So I know this is a problem that many of us are working on all the time, but ways that you can build vaccine confidence to address vaccine hesitancy is, of course, to get yourself as as you can about the vaccine and understand responses to those frequently asked questions. We know that parents and caregivers trust pediatricians, and to maintain that trust, we need to continue to listen to their questions and then in response provide really clear and consistent information. It's important that we be really honest and state what we do know and what we don't know. But in that vein of honesty, we don't need to overemphasize potentials, whether those be potential risks or potential benefits that one may have from the vaccine. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we have already probably discussed that post-vaccination life, unfortunately, will not turn immediately to normal, and that many of the safety precautions that we're living with will need to remain in place. Pediatricians across the US have done a great job already of implementing these many safety practices, but we'll need to continue to practice our physical distancing, wearing our cloth-based masks and covers, and then using PPE during any medical encounters. It unfortunately will be some time before there is evidence that the vaccines not only prevent illness in the person who's vaccinated, but also prevent them from transmitting the virus before we can determine that we can come out of some of those precautions. And one role that pediatricians can fill is they can really help explain this to families, so that we'll continue to promote those safety practices overall and in the communities. So next slide, please. So with that, I would like to leave you with some links to some resources for further information. And of course, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak here today. And I think we'll flip to